Alright, so Christopher Nolan's long-awaited Oppenheimer biopic is finally upon us. This was definitely the movie I've been looking forward to the most this year, and I'd basically built up an impossibly huge expectation for it, but somehow thankfully it actually lived up. Just gonna say this right now, if anyone other than Cilian Murphy ends up winning most of the Best Actor awards this year, I will be absolutely shocked. There's straight up no way that anyone's going to be better than him this year. He's the foundation that this movie's built upon, and it's definitely an all-time performance. He completely disappears into the role. I'd be surprised if he's even out there in the real world walking around these days feeling like himself yet, honestly. This is Christopher Nolan's first ever biopic. Dunkirk also followed real world events, of course, but it was more about the events themselves and didn't focus on any one guy. As much as I love his action thrillers, I definitely hope this isn't the last biopic we see from him. Because as cliche as this sounds, he actually brought this character to life in a pretty remarkable way. It's not just recreating the events that happened in Oppenheimer's life, it's seeing the way his personality and views dynamically change as the world around him adapts to the war and the shifting political climate. While Murphy is the standout without question, the rest of the supporting cast had to be really on their game just to be able to keep up, really, and they absolutely did. Matt Damon and Florence Pugh were solid, but for me, Emily Blunt and Robert Downey Jr. were the other standouts. I genuinely did not immediately recognize Downey when he first came on screen. It's wild seeing him just play like an old man politician, considering a couple years ago he was still Iron Man. Also, yet another unexpected Benny Safdie appearance in this one. Always glad to see him. The Russian accent was maybe not at a 10 yet if I'm being honest, but it wasn't like distractingly bad either, you know? This being a Nolan movie, of course it does also look incredible. I love the decision to have the one timeline be in black and white and the rest in color. It really helped to differentiate the overall vibe between the pre-explosion and post-explosion eras of Oppenheimer's life. I also liked that the movie's timeline was presented in a non-linear fashion. With a runtime of a full 3 hours, breaking it up like that made it feel like the movie was always progressing fairly quickly. Perhaps the only real criticism I would have of the movie is that by the last act, following the explosion, it mostly stops jumping around the timeline, and the last 40-ish minutes with the hearings and all the Senate stuff just plays out normally. I had no problem with that, because it's such an important part of his life, and it is a biopic at the end of the day, so it makes sense to have the latter events of his life at the end of the movie. It's just pacing-wise when the movie is 3 hours, and even though it's not quote-unquote the best part of the movie, the whole thing does kind of feel like it's building towards the bomb test the whole time, obviously. So when that climax happens and then there's a decent amount of movie left and it's just people talking in boardrooms, I would understand if people were feeling pretty maxed out by the end of the whole thing. Again, not something that bothered me, just if someone said the end felt like it was taking a little too long, I wouldn't really be able to argue against that, honestly. It also wouldn't be fair to go on and on about the visuals in Oppenheimer without also praising the audio, because they're both outstanding. It's been really hard to get in to see Oppenheimer. I had the chance to go a couple days earlier on a regular screen, but I ended up waiting a little longer to get to go to the IMAX, and I definitely don't regret that decision. Almost more so for the audio, honestly. It just adds that layer of intensity and immersion when the bass is vibrating your whole body, you know? I also found this movie to be very thought-provoking in a couple different ways. The obvious one is, yeah, this movie does make you contemplate nuclear destruction pretty heavily. This thing that was invented all the way back in the 40s is still to this day the most likely reason that we could see the Earth completely destroyed in our lifetime. If there were betting odds for what will eventually cause the end of all life on Earth, nuclear war would be the huge favorite right now. The end of the movie is also a strong reminder that no matter what you do for your country, none of it matters and it will all be taken away from you if you don't play the political game correctly. Oppenheimer was essentially used as a pawn by shady politicians trying to make a name for themselves after the war. Not because he was a communist, but simply because at one time in his life he had entertained the possibility that communism might have some merit, so he interacted with members of that party and explored their ideas, ultimately deciding that he did not actually agree with them. But the mere fact that he was ever even around those circles was enough for him to get completely dragged, even after saving America's ass during the war. You still see this type of thing to this day, even more than ever, honestly, where it's your actions in life are basically void because something you said or thought at one time is disagreeable to the current political party that's in power. It's just a good reminder that absolutely no one is ever exempt from the political outrage machine. Not 80 years ago, not today. There's really not that much more I can say, honestly. Oppenheimer was just an incredibly well-made movie, and it nailed pretty much every aspect. Should be seeing plenty of award nominations for acting, directing, audio, and visual, but that's not what's important, really. The important thing is that this is a 3-hour biopic about an academic that somehow manages to feel just as exciting as an action movie at certain moments, and is legitimately thought-provoking and insightful, not just purely entertaining. Overall, I would consider Oppenheimer to be a masterpiece, and personally, it's my favorite Christopher Nolan movie I've seen since Inception, which was like 13 years ago. Pretty easily the best movie of the year up to this point, in my opinion. And yeah, that's pretty much all I got with this one. If you've seen it, let me know your thoughts in the comments. If you got a minute to like and subscribe, that would be massively appreciated. And I'll catch you on the next one. Peace.